weather enthusiasts. I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. All right, here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have quite a few things that we're going to be going over with you today, starting with the situation that is currently unfolding in the Eastern Pacific. We now have a 90/90 tag on Invest 94E and some new updates that we're going to be going over in terms of satellite analysis and where this is potentially going to be going and what this means for potentially the Bay of Campeche and Gulf Coast. We're also looking at some increased probabilities of development in the main development region as of recently. So we're going to be talking about all of that today. So let's go ahead and go to the National Hurricane Center and get started. And this is what we have going on with Invest 94E. We're going to go ahead and read this off real quickly. We have a 90% chance of formation in the next 7 days, as I alluded to earlier. Showers and thunderstorms associated with a broad area of low pressure located offshore the coast of Central America have become a little bit better organized this morning. Environmental conditions appear conducive for development of the system, and a tropical depression is likely to form in the next day or so. And a tropical depression while it moves west-northwestward near the coast of El Salvador, Guatemala, and southeastern Mexico. These interests in these locations should monitor the progress of the system. Regardless of the developments, heavy rains are likely across portions of Mexico and Central America over the next few days. 90% probability of development in the next 48 hours, 90% in the next 7 days. So just to break this down for you guys very quickly, what we had yesterday, I think we had a 30-70 probability, either that or a 40-70 probability. We can go ahead and take a quick look at the archives, taking a look at the Tropical Weather Outlook archives very quickly just to show you. So here's what we had kind of at this time yesterday. So here's what we had. We had a 40-70 probability of development in with 94E, 40% chance in the next 48 hours, 70% in the next 7 days. 6 hours later, it went up to 60-80, so we saw a bit of a jump there. Then last night, we went up to 70-80, and then this morning, we jumped up to 80-90, and now we're at 90-90. So it's really upticked and really ramped up in chances of development in the last 24 hours. And what that's telling me is this system is either going to develop either in the next hour or so at the 4 p.m. Central Time, 5 p.m. Eastern advisory, or it's going to develop a little bit later at 11 p.m. Eastern, or in Pacific Time, 8 p.m. Pacific Time. That's what this is telling me in terms of the NHC probabilities, that on its own. But we'll have to do some satellite analysis and to kind of further investigate why they're doing a 90-90 so much quicker than a lot of us anticipated. So going to the satellite imagery and moving down to the Eastern Pacific, here's the situation that we have going on. So moving over right here, you're looking at better organized convection going on, less popcorning convection and more consistent convection. Also noticing that the convection is a bit further to the north, and at least where the mid-level and low-level circulation is looking like it's going to be dropping is a bit further to the north than what we were originally anticipating. Because here's the current situation. Our current location, as of right now, this is of about 6 hours ago, so this may be updated by the time this video ends, but we're at 10.4 degrees north and 94.4 degrees west, which, if we go ahead and go back to the satellite imagery, is right about here, where my cursor is right here, if you guys can see that. But a lot of the convection and a lot of the rotation is further northwest than what we were looking at previously. So let's go ahead now and move over. Actually, no, let's go ahead and go to current storms and go to the satellite imagery right here. But this is what we were looking at. 10 and 90. This is where the center was supposed to be, but we're noticing some more rotation. At least what we're looking at least maybe the center is starting to develop here around this region, about 12 degrees to about 12 degrees north, 92 degrees west. So much further to the northwest than what we were originally thinking. This is at least based on satellite imagery, and we can go ahead and zoom out of this a little bit in terms of see if we can do true color, just to kind of show you this as well. We're starting to notice that as well, especially as the outflow is starting to get its act together as well. Noticing that rotation around here instead of further down to the south around here. So you're going to want to pay attention to that. And if the LCL does develop over here much further to the northwest than we were thinking, then that's going to cause some problems, especially as it puts more of the Gulf of Tehuantepec in the line of fire over here. And that also plays some concern as to what's going to be happening in terms of how this will potentially impact the Gulf. And I actually talked to one of my buddies, Andrew Austin Adler. He's also on Twitter and all that. He was talking about with me on Storms United, and he told me that if we wanted 94E to enter the Gulf region, the Bay of Campeche, it would likely have to make landfall in the Tehuantepec region of Mexico right here and then get pushed further up to the north. The main question that we were having, though, was a potential blocking pattern that may keep it over land or just offshore, and it won't really have much time to develop at this current point. But we'll see how this pans out and how this will ultimately develop. But if this does develop further to the north than what we were thinking about, that does put more of these regions in the line of fire, like especially the Gulf of Tehuantepec, and the NHC has highlighted this pretty precipitously in their little cone graphic right here. We don't have an official cone yet because this hasn't developed and the LCL hasn't really dropped yet, but we'll have to see how this will pan out. But it's definitely looking a lot better than it was yesterday. I have to say that. Matter of fact, we can actually go ahead and go back about 120 frames just to show you kind of the evolution of the system. As you can see, not very much convection across much of the center and all of that, but then last night we saw a lot of convection really blow up, and it wasn't this popcorning convection, it was more consistent convection. Yes, you had convection flaring up and going down, but this was like less isolated and more building off of each other. And that's something you're going to want to pay attention to, and that's something you're going to want to consider pretty quickly, actually, as the system organizes and develops. And even the satellite imagery shifted a bit further to the north just to kind of reflect that. So ultimately, that's the thing we're going to have to pay attention to. It's this area right here that's showing increased rotation. Vorticity's definitely increased up there as well. So we're going to have to watch that as well. Shifting over to the model runs, we're going to go ahead and briefly go over these, and then we're going to shift over to the conditions and our main development region setup as well. So here's what we have with the models. We're going to show you the European, and then the GFS, and then their respective ensembles, and then we're going to go ahead and move on to the other operational runs that we have. Now, the operational runs that we're showing right here, this is 0Z as of right now, and you also have to understand that this hasn't really developed just yet. And it needs to ultimately do that. It needs to get a low-level circulation developed before these models can initialize properly. But we can give you an idea of what's potentially going on with the European and the GFS, and then we can go on from there. The European's still favoring a bit more of a westward shift right here compared to what we were seeing in the NHC graphic over there, as well as what's kind of happening on the ground. As well. And then as it moves and makes landfall in Mexico as a tropical storm, it crashes into land, dissipates, and doesn't really do that much in the Gulf region over there. Moving on to the GFS, we can show you the 0Z and then the 12Z to see if it's adjusting or not. The 0Z's organizing, developing, having this down to a 979 millibar hurricane before crashing into Mexico and then just ultimately dissipating. And the convection does move into parts of the Bay of Campeche, but that's about it. And that's kind of what we have for 0Z. Looking at the 12Z, let's see how this has evolved. Ultimately, the 12Z wants this to move further to the west before crashing into Mexico as an potentially even stronger hurricane. 975 millibars right there before moving inland and just staying inland and just moving into the mountains and dissipating right there. So that's an interesting thing we're going to want to pay attention to. Looking at the GFS ensembles a little bit, yes, you still have some ensembles calling for the system to move into the Bay of Campeche over here, but you also have other ensembles, and I can go ahead and move this over to show you this. You have other ensembles as well that keep this out in the Eastern Pacific as well, so you're going to want to pay attention to see how this happens. That's the 0Z. Looking at the 12Z, 12Z is still a bit more split, but the majority of the runs do want this to crash into Mexico and ultimately dissipate, although there is some signs that we could see this continuing, this development continuing in the Bay of Campeche. But at this current point, the chances of that aren't particularly too high, and we're going to want to keep tabs on that going forward. You're seeing a lot of this weak stuff, but it's likely going to be a disturbance according to the GFS ensembles. Looking at the European ensembles, here's the 0Z, mainly staying in the Eastern Pacific and crashing into Mexico and not really doing much going forward. 12Z from yesterday, similar situation, although a lot stronger, and some had it moving further out to the coast. So we're going to have to monitor these situations as they continue to evolve and continue to progress. So that's the ensemble runs. Now we can go ahead and show you some hurricane runs as well to kind of even this out a little bit before we move on to our next section over here. Let's go ahead and move on to the hurricane runs. We're going to start with the HMON for 94E and then move from there. We can use precip and moisture to kind of give you an idea of what's going on with this. So here's what we have. The HMON has the system organizing, developing, yet some pretty interesting banding features starting to really move. The HMON wants this to get to a hurricane, potentially category. Let me take a look at this. Pressure's 964 millibars. That's equivalent to a category 2 hurricane in the Atlantic. Looking at main sea level pressure and 10 millibar winds. Yep, this is actually advocating because of how small it is for a category 3 hurricane, a potential major hurricane to make landfall. Or at least, or category 2, category 3 hurricane to make landfall in Mexico right here. It looks like it's going to stay west of the Gulf of Tehuantepec over here before crashing in and just ultimately dissipating as it moves into the mountains right there. So you're going to want to pay attention to that. That's the HMON run. Looking at the HAVS A. Let's take a quick look at that. The HAVS A has the system organizing and developing, strengthens up to potentially a hurricane as it makes landfall in the Gulf of Tehuantepec right here. But from then on out, it just kind of just scatters all over the place, and we can't really tell too much of what's going on. But if we do see a situation where this thing makes landfall in the Gulf of Tehuantepec, that could cross into the Bay of Campeche and potentially start some development right there. Looking at the HAVS B run as well, similar situation, intensifies pretty quickly. Gets down to 956 millibars as well, but I don't particularly like the intensity of this right here, how low the pressure ultimately gets. But it does crash into the Gulf of Tehuantepec further to the east, and then it moves into the Bay of... It does, at least according to the trajectory I saw from some of the other runs, it does try to move into the Bay of Campeche at this current rate, but we'll have to see what ultimately happens. And then we'll go ahead and show you the H-Wharf as well. Pretty aggressive run as well. The H-Wharf has the system making landfall west of the Gulf of Tehuantepec and then moving into Mexico and dissipating from there. So ultimately, where this boils down to, and also the initialization on all these runs does seem a bit interesting, to say the very least. It's a little weird how these have initialized. But if it does initialize further to the north and all these runs are anticipating, then we're going to have a situation where, okay, we're going to want to watch this a lot more closely, because it looks to me that the conditions are a bit ahead of what the models are forecasting for all this. So I want to pay close attention to it. Right now, the reason I'm not looking at these, I'm not taking these models at face value, is because I'm looking at the conditions and they're telling me something is different. And this is going to be a bit different than what these models are going for. And that's why I haven't ruled out this system making landfall in the Bay of in the Gulf of Tehuantepec yet, and then making landfall in the Gulf as well and moving over there, mainly because the conditions seem different from what the models are telling you. And this is a pretty important factor for what I'm about to tell you, and it's going to be important for the rest of hurricane season. Models are one thing, but conditions are a whole other ballpark. And this is something I've been using since, a phrase I've been using since 2023, so that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. Now let's go ahead and move on to the other area I do want to talk about, and that is the main development region. Patrick, you've been talking about the Gulf of Tehuantepec and the Bay of Campeche for a while. What about the main development region? Well, here's the situation that we have right here. This is the European ensemble's tropical cyclone development probabilities right here, and this is what we're noticing. We're noticing a bit of an uptick of the probabilities over in this part of the eastern main development region, especially over the last couple of days. Let's go ahead and go back to Friday right here. This is the runs that were coming out on Friday the 13th. right here, basically a 5 to 10% probability in a lot of areas, and then 10 to 20 across much of the parts of the eastern MDR. Then going up to here, the probabilities start to uptick a bit and this is you have to understand, this is the week of June 30th, June 23rd to June 30th. So this is late June. I forgot to mention that. I apologize for that. And you're seeing these probabilities uptick, and they do expand a little bit. But then you're going to the 15th right here. And yes, the probabilities do get a bit more concentrated. You're not seeing that much of a spread compared to previously, but you are noticing an uptick of the probabilities. You now have a 20 to 30% tag in this part of the main development region. You did not have this previously. So that's telling me, okay, the European ensemble runs, in terms of their potential for tropical development, are telling me that something is happening that wasn't there before. What exactly is going on? And now we can go ahead and briefly go over some of the conditions that we can potentially look at. Water temperatures we're not going to go over because that's pretty much a constant, but we can go over the wind shear and the dry air aspects of it, as well as the vorticity aspects of it. So let's go ahead now and move to the North Atlantic and then shift our focus to the wind shear and the dry air. Let's start with wind shear and kind of get through this once again. So ultimately, what we have here is you have a situation where the wind shear is kind of persistent for a little while, but as the 23rd does start to come around, you start to notice around the 22nd or so, based on previous runs and this one, that the wind shear does start to collapse a little bit in the eastern main development region. You're starting to notice lower wind shear across the entire region over here through much of the rest of the mile run. Yes, wind shear does start to come back around the 28th or so and the 29th, but ultimately you do see a pocket of low wind shear by the 26th of June that could potentially be a situation where a tropical cyclone does take advantage of that, and that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. I think this is part of the reason why the European ensembles are highlighting this as a 20-30 probability instead of a 10-20 or 5-10 now. Now let's go ahead and shift over to the moisture right here, and this is another situation we have. Yes, there's going to be some Sahara dust in the main development region, but there are two pockets of moist air that do come off the coast of Africa right here, off the Sahel region. And what you're noticing with this right here is you're noticing that you have these two areas of moisture right here, these two pockets of moisture from these tropical waves. And I think if anything does develop, it's going to be in that region right here as it couples and decouples with the intertropical convergence zone. This is around June 27th, June 28th. As well, so it's in that week period. So you're going to want to pay attention to that factor as well. And another thing you're going to want to watch is how much above average is this moisture right here. This is pretty above average compared to what we were seeing. This is precipitable water anomaly right here. How much precipitable water does the environment have compared to the normal mean, the climatological mean? Much more above average, at least in the southern half of the main development region over here, where tropical development is more probable in the month of June. So that's a factor that you're going to want to pay attention to for that week. And that's, I think, a reason why you're seeing those probabilities start to uptick. And I do think that if we start seeing, okay, we're at 20-30, if we start seeing maybe a wider spread of that, of 20-30 probability, and then maybe a 30-40, and we start seeing gradual increases with this instead of just a bunch of noise, then you're going to want to pay attention to that. So that's the situation that we're looking at in the main development region. One last thing I want to take a look at is the vorticity. I want to take a look at 500 millibar vorticity just to kind of show you what we're looking at. Why are we talking vorticity? That's your spin, ladies and gentlemen. That's your spin. And ultimately, what you're noticing here is you are seeing an increase of upper level vorticity across parts of the region, the main development region, around the 26th of June or so. It's still too early to determine exactly what's going to be out there, but you are noticing those upticks compared to what we were seeing previously, and those are those areas that you're going to want to pay attention to for tropical development, and those are some areas that we're going to continue to pay attention to and keep you updated on here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close the video out right here. I really hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. The goal, as always, is to get more people engaged with weather. If you want to come hang out with us, if you want to help us out, or you want to ask us some questions, be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.